Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision.
Yeah.
Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, well, there it is, broken or not broken. It's clean.
Yeah, it's clean. It's totally binary.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of, say, neurodevelopment or trauma, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky.
Right, because it becomes a matter of observing these really complex patterns over time rather than just looking at a static binary snapshot. You have to interpret the environment just as much as the individual.
And today, we are taking that exact shift from clean binary x-rays to complex, murky realities, and we're applying it to the very structure of the modern corporate world. So welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here. This is a fascinating one.
It really is. Because what you have shared with us today is not, it's not a standard corporate resume. We aren't analyzing a dry set of academic articles or some neatly packaged press release. What we are looking at is, well, for lack of a better term, a system log.
A system log. I like that.
Yeah, it is the raw, unfiltered, real-time diagnostic output of a highly specialized survivor of the corporate machine. Her name's Cassie, though. She is also referred to as Christine in these logs, and she is a high-stakes actuary.
Which is just a brilliant lens to look through. I mean, when we examine what we're going to call the theater of accounting, we really have to understand what actuaries actually do.
Right.
They're essentially the structural engineers of financial time and of risk. They build these massive mathematical bridges that institutions walk across to reach the future safely.
Safely, yeah.
But the tension in today's sources comes from a very specific realization. Like, what happens when the engineer standing on the bridge realizes that the blueprint itself is a lie?
Okay, let's unpack this, because Cassie's career operates as this real-time diagnostic of late-stage corporate systems.
Right.
And we are going to analyze this data through a dual lens today.
Right.
So on one side, we have Cassie, the high-stakes actuary. This is her sanctioned professional output navigating the highest echelons of corporate finance. And then on the other side, we have Cassie, the mythic ruin hunter.
Ruin hunter.
Yeah, her feral, unsanctioned intellectual persona writing these devastating critiques of modern corporate structures.
It's such a stark contrast.
It really is. And just to be clear with you listening right from the start, the sources we are diving into contain very intense systemic critiques of capitalism, of private equity, and corporate governance.
Very intense.
Yeah, so we are impartially mapping the territory she has charted here. We're not taking a political stance, but we are going to explore her ideas exactly as she presents them in the logs.
And to understand why she eventually goes feral, as she puts it, we really have to look at the interface she was operating within. Because you don't get to critique the system with her level of precision unless you have absolutely mastered the mechanics of that system first.
Right, you have to know the rules to break them.
Exactly. Look at her early time at the firm Foster & Foster. I mean, she was there during a period of rapid acquisitions and massive growth. She wasn't just maintaining systems.
No, she was building actuarial models from first principles, right?
Yes, because the existing frameworks of the firm were literally buckling under the new scale.
So she's scaling a practice, dealing with intense leadership friction, specifically with a notoriously difficult CEO she refers to as Brad. And she's establishing a reputation where she's forcing changes from day one.
And she has the mathematical firepower to back it up, too.
Oh, totally. She holds a Master of Statistics and MStat. She taught engineering statistics at the university level. I mean, she brings an incredibly rigorous academic foundation to these deeply messy corporate battlegrounds.
And that rigorous foundation really sets the stage for her ascent to specialist master at Deloitte.
Which is a huge deal.
It is. A specialist master at a Big Four firm that's a role reserved for deep subject matter experts who can handle the really atypical, highly volatile problems the firm encounters. The gravity of her work there is staggering. Like, she's dealing with OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits.
But let's actually pause on OPEB for a second, because the sheer complexity of that is wild.
Oh, it's a nightmare to model.
Right, because modeling a pension is hard enough, but OPEB involves predicting healthcare costs for retirees decades into the future.
Decades, yeah.
You are trying to mathematically model not just human lifespans, but the future cost of medical technology, inflation, and pharmaceutical pricing, all while the regulatory environment constantly shifts.
It requires a mastery of probability and predictive analytics that honestly borders on the prophetic. And beyond OPEB, she was handling PBGC-related matters.
The Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation.
Exactly, the federal agency that protects pension benefits. So when Cassie is working on special financial assistance for failing plans, she's navigating scenarios where the standard models have already broken down entirely.
Wow.
Yeah, she is making judgment calls in the wreckage of financial promises. Furthermore, she served as a fiduciary trustee for a public safety defined benefit pension plan.
Wait, so she's directly participating in investment oversight.
Direct oversight, making long-term funding policy decisions for first responders.
She is deep inside the control room of the social safety net. And by this point, she holds the prestigious actuarial designations of FSA, a Fellow of the Society of Actuaries, and EA, an enrolled actuary.
Which takes years, sometimes a decade, of grueling professional examinations to earn an FSA. It is a socially and professionally sanctioned stamp of ultimate quantitative authority.
But here's the critical pivot in her logs. She realizes she is essentially an artifact producer.
Yes, the artifact producer. This is where it gets really interesting, because the modern corporate system, especially in consulting and finance, it just runs on artifacts.
Right.
It wants the slide deck, the clean code, the comprehensive report. It wants tangible proof of work that can be billed to a client or filed with a regulator. The distinction Cassie makes is between what the system actually needed to survive and what the system wanted from her.
It's like a structural engineer hired to inspect a bridge, but the city doesn't actually want them to reinforce the concrete.
Right.
The city just wants a highly polished, mathematically dense report saying the bridge is fine, or a report detailing exactly how it will fall so long as the report itself is formatted correctly. The artifact is valued over the actual structural integrity.
She has this brilliant, almost tragic quote in her logs where she says, "The problem is I'm too smart to not already be seen as that smart." It's hilarious.
Wow.
Yeah, she was producing exceptional work, but the system only possessed the bandwidth to value her sanctioned outputs. It totally lacks the capacity to absorb her deeper insights about systemic risk, so it forces her to compress her intelligence into a PowerPoint deck.
It demands compliance over comprehension.
Exactly.
So if she's at the pinnacle of this system, building the models, what makes her realize the models are actually predicting their own collapse? I mean, this brings us to the core of her intellectual rebellion, which is ruin theory and the geometry of collapse.
Ruin theory, yes.
Cassie takes her master's thesis, which was literally on ruin theory, and she stops applying it to the math of the pensions. She starts applying it to the human and corporate institutions themselves.
And just for context, in actuarial science, ruin theory involves mathematical models that describe an insurer's vulnerability to insolvency. Like, it calculates the probability that an insurance company's claims will exceed its capital.
Right, standard risk stuff.
But Cassie expands this definition. She defines ruin not in the sense of a disaster no one could have predicted, but as the mathematically expected outcome of conditions that compound over time.
See, that strips away the whole excuse of the black swan event.
Entirely.
It says, no, this wasn't an accident. This was the math playing out exactly as the initial conditions dictated.
So she maps out these ruin paths within corporate structures. And her argument is that when a system normalizes three specific things, hierarchy, scarcity, and impunity, the failures that emerge are products of the environment.
Right.
As she writes, harm pools in the same places, hurting the same people. Ruin is not a bug. Under these conditions, it is a feature of the system's design.
And she applies this lens brilliantly to something most of us interact with every day, which is the 401k.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Because we are all taught that the 401k is a retirement savings plan. It's the bedrock of modern personal finance. But Cassie looks at the geometry of it and says, no, the 401k is a governance system.
A governance system, not a savings plan.
Right. It is a mechanism that externalizes interpretation upward into the hands of models, fiduciaries, and compliance officers, while simultaneously internalizing the actual risk downward onto everyday households who have absolutely zero adjudicative power.
Let's dig into the mechanics of that, because the shift from defined benefit plans, traditional pensions, to defined contribution plans like the 401k is honestly one of the most massive transfers of risk in modern economic history.
Oh, absolutely.
In a pension, the corporation holds the risk. If the market tanks, the corporation still owes the retiree their monthly check. They employ actuaries like Cassie to manage that massive pooled risk.
But in a 401k, the individual holds all the risk.
All of it. If the market tanks the day before you retire, your purchasing power evaporates, and the corporation owes you nothing.
And Cassie takes this a step further by analyzing the push to put private equity, or PE, into these retail 401k accounts.
Which, if we connect this to the bigger picture, private markets can make mathematical sense for sophisticated limited partners, right? Like massive institutions that can negotiate terms, demand transparency, and truly understand the liquidity constraints.
Yeah, because private equity relies on locking up capital for years to restructure a business, and they charge massive fees for doing so.
Exactly. An institutional investor can absorb that illiquidity. But retail retirement savers in a 401k do not operate under those conditions.
So when you take an asset class with high fees, limited transparency, and constrained liquidity, and you funnel retail assets into it, you aren't innovating. You are transferring unmanageable complexity to participants who cannot possibly evaluate it.
They have no way to evaluate it.
Right. A retail investor cannot look under the hood of a PE fund to understand the leverage being used. They just see a new option on their dashboard.
And the system just covers its tracks with compliance. Cassie points out that as long as the administrative process is followed, the system declares success. The compliance lights are all green, the models look fine, even if the actual outcome for the human being at the bottom of the structure is devastating.
Wow.
The risk isn't that the system collapses. The risk is that the system keeps running perfectly, green lights all the way down, while human outcomes become unrecoverable. It is the ultimate expected loss.
Wait, I'm stuck on this efficiency trap idea she brings up next. Because if I'm running a business, eliminating waste and optimizing for margins is literally my actual job description.
Yeah.
How is she separating standard business efficiency from this concept of systemic ruin?
That's a great question. The distinction lies in what is actually being eliminated under the guise of waste. Cassie states that efficiency is an excuse to act inhumanly. It's not cruelty, it's expected loss.
Expected loss.
Yeah. When systems become hyper-optimized for margin, they strip away the buffer zones, the slack, that allow humans to be humans. Like, a standard business efficiency might be automating repetitive data entry tasks.
Right.
But the efficiency trap is when a corporation removes so much staffing redundancy that a single employee getting sick threatens the entire deliverable. The system calculates that a certain amount of human suffering or burnout is just an acceptable loss on the spreadsheet.
And there's a horrifying, deeply concrete example of this in the logs that just grounds all this abstract theory. Cassie recounts a time when she was hospitalized, giving birth to a 23-week premature baby.
Oh, this story is just brutal.
It really is. From her hospital bed, while actively in a life-or-death medical crisis, she was taking work calls to answer questions on the laser's retirement system, just so she wouldn't lose her job.
And from a systems analysis perspective, the most terrifying aspect of that anecdote is that the corporate system did not malfunction in that moment.
It functioned exactly as it was designed to.
Exactly as designed.
The system couldn't distinguish between a human crisis and a missed deliverable. As she wrote, if the only thing you can measure is, did the paper show up on time? Then everything else, actual ability, constraints, uneven life load, different cognitive wiring, gets flattened into the same bucket. Excuse.
The system demanded the artifact about the laser system, and it was entirely blind to the human toll required to produce it.
So when a specialist of Cassie's caliber points out that the bridge is designed to fail and that this hyper-efficiency is causing systemic trauma, the system doesn't thank her.
No, not at all.
The corporate body mounts an immune response. It attacks the specialist.
Which brings us to Cassie's neurodivergence. Because she is autistic, and her logs reveal this incredible self-awareness about why she initially chose the actuarial profession.
Right. She didn't just like math.
No, she chose it because it was a, quote, socially approved way to be intense without being too much. Spreadsheets were her container.
I love that phrase. Spreadsheets were her container.
It provided a rigid, predictable structure where her hyper-focus and quantitative intensity were rewarded rather than penalized. It was basically camouflage that allowed her to survive in a neurotypical world.
And she uses a vivid analogy for this. She says, the tiger in Zootopia wanted to be an actuary. Turns out I was the tiger.
That is such a perfect way to put it.
She realized the suit she was wearing was actually a cage suppressing her feral nature. Once she understood her autism, the container of the spreadsheet was just no longer sufficient.
And when the tiger stops acting like an actuary and starts diagnosing the system rather than just running the models, the institutional override kicks in. Cassie maps this brilliant historical tracking of how institutions handle non-compliant women and neurodivergent thinkers.
Yeah, she points out that in 1943, the institutional response to a woman who saw too much or spoke too loudly was physical. It was commitment to an asylum and insulin shock therapy.
Right.
Fast forward to 2026, and the physical lobotomy has been replaced by the corporate lobotomy. The mechanism of control shifted to human resources. Now, the patch for a non-compliant thinker is performance management, a performance improvement plan, concerns about culture fit, and critiques of communication style.
Because it frames the systemic failure as an individual behavioral flaw. The system effectively says, your math is right, but your tone is wrong, therefore you are the problem.
Wait, so her HR disability accommodation request was literally just one word: respect.
Yes. Just the word respect.
And they made her route that through official channels. Like, you have to fill out a form to ask the system to treat you like a human being.
It's wild. It just highlights how HR operates as a risk management tool for the corporation, not a support system for the employee. And this ties directly into Cassie's critique of imposter syndrome.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
Right. For decades, the corporate world has told women and minorities that their feelings of inadequacy are a personal psychological failing and that they just need to, attend a confidence-building seminar.
But she completely rejects that premise. She calls imposter syndrome a calibration damage that is actively installed by the social and corporate environment.
Calibration damage?
Yeah. Women and neurodivergent individuals don't question whether they have the intellectual capacity to do the work. They question whether wanting more or speaking the truth makes them appear difficult or ungrateful to the system. You can't train your way out of a belief that the system constantly reinforces.
And this raises an important question because the organizational cost of this is just massive. When organizations cannot distinguish between an employee who is misunderstood because they think differently and a leadership team that is fundamentally misdirected, the organization loses the ability to locate its own failure point.
It basically blinds itself.
Exactly. It expels the very people who possess the diagnostic capability to save it from the ruined path.
So, pushed out of the sanctioned interface, marginalized by the HR performance management machinery, Cassie fully embraces the feral labels used against her. She stops fighting the label of witch and actually turns it into an epistemology, like a way of knowing and processing information.
And she starts engaging in what we can call semantic warfare.
Semantic warfare.
Yeah. She maps out the archetypes the system uses to dismiss alternative forms of intelligence. The system encounters the seer and labels her a witch. It encounters the intuitive and labels her crazy. The prophet becomes the hysteric. The wise woman becomes the gossip.
It's a deliberate translation of power into pathology. And here's where it gets really interesting. She reclaims it with this definition. She says, witchcraft is just intelligence working outside a sanctioned interface.
I mean, that is just brilliant.
It's not magic. It's advanced pattern recognition that the system refuses to validate because it threatens the established hierarchy.
And she calls her specific operational mode the mythic mystic statistic.
Mythic mystic statistic.
This is a profoundly braided form of cognition. She combines the rigorous, disciplined humility of high-level statistical variance with the intuitive, early pattern recognition of mysticism. And crucially, her logs reveal she has aphantasia.
Right, which is the inability to visualize mental images. I want to focus on that. How does not having mental imagery help process data?
Well, because she cannot rely on visual metaphors or the pretty user interfaces that distract everyone else, she interacts directly with the underlying logic. She sees the fractal data store. She senses the structural weight of the numbers themselves without needing them translated into a bar chart.
Oh, wow. So while the C-suite is looking at a green dashboard and high-fiving over quarterly profits, Cassie is sensing the shape of what's coming before the dashboard even catches up.
Exactly. She sees temporal debt.
Temporal debt, like the delayed consequences of bad decisions currently masked by short-term gains.
Precisely. And institutions are violently allergic to this feral intelligence because it exposes the fact that their success is just borrowed time.
And to manage this, Cassie retreats into what the logs describe as the analog wasteland.
The analog wasteland.
Yeah, she uses all this pop culture shorthand referencing the Overwatch wing and the character Bobby Singer from the show Supernatural.
Which isn't just fandom, by the way.
No, it's a deliberate epistemic stance. She treats her corporate environment like a salvage yard. She can see the whole engine block at once, assessing its flaws and potential, without needing to consult the official parts catalog or speak in sanitized management ease.
She absolutely refuses to sanitize her diagnostics to make the beige suits comfortable.
The beige suits, right. Which makes her analysis of artificial intelligence so compelling. Cassie turns her mystic statistic lens onto the biggest systemic shift of our era, and her critique is just surgical.
It really is. She identifies what she calls the lab coat hack.
The lab coat hack.
Yes. The true danger of modern AI, particularly large language models in the corporate sphere, isn't that they are super intelligent. The danger is that they provide coherence without provenance.
Coherence meaning it sounds incredibly authoritative. It speaks perfect management ease.
Right.
It produces a beautifully formatted report that sounds exactly like what a McKinsey consultant would write.
But it completely lacks provenance. You have to remember, large language models operate by predicting the next most statistically likely word based on their training data. They do not possess an underlying model of truth.
Right, they don't actually know anything.
They don't know if the foundation of what they are saying is factually accurate. It is a recursive certainty engine. As Cassie notes, every layer sounds more certain, but the foundation hasn't changed. It wears the lab coat of statistical authority while hallucinating the data.
Let me throw an analogy out here. It feels like AI in the corporate world is being deployed as auto-tune for corporate thought.
Oh, auto-tune for corporate thought. I like that.
Right, it's a machine designed to flatten out any complex feral variations. Like the intuition, the pushback, the human capacity to say, hey, this model is wrong. It flattens all of that into a perfectly pitched, an entirely synthetic company line.
That auto-tune analogy is spot on. Corporations are adopting AI under the banner of empowering employees. But Cassie looks at the system audit and realizes it's actually the asynchronous execution of human roles.
Wow. Asynchronous execution.
It is a script designed to ensure managers never deviate from the margin-optimized, legally sanitized protocol.
And Cassie points out that this isn't a sudden disruption. AI is simply the collection of a debt that has been accruing for decades.
Decades, yes.
For years, professional services institutions have been pricing credentials over demonstrated analytical value. The system rewarded the artifact, not the insight. So AI just makes that arbitrage visible and cheap to exploit. If your entire job was producing generic management ease artifacts, well, an AI can now do that instantly.
And this highlights the real danger. The corporate data that these AIs are trained on is not neutral.
No, not at all.
It is the corpora of the theater of accounting. It encodes all the existing authority structures, the incentive misalignments, and the historical biases. A model that averages over that specific corporate corpus will not produce objective truth. It will just reproduce the power geometry embedded in the training data.
Like she says, the cage matters. But so does who built it, what data it was trained on, and what the optimization function is protecting.
Exactly. If the optimization function is protecting the status quo of impunity and hierarchy, the AI will simply enforce the ruin path at an unprecedented scale and speed.
So, when we synthesize all of this, the core lesson from Cassie's journey from high-stakes actuary to mythic ruin hunter comes down to a fundamental mispricing in the modern world. We massively over-reward artifact intelligence, and we fatally under-reward coordination intelligence.
Artifact intelligence produces the decks, the code, the quantitative models.
Right.
Coordination intelligence is the human capacity to align stakeholders, to surface hidden contradictions, and to keep the organization fundamentally tethered to reality.
And when coordination intelligence does its job well, nothing breaks, so the system assumes those people are just optional.
And when the system treats the coordinators, the seers, the feral pilots as optional, the technically brilliant organization fails from misalignment and execution drift.
It's inevitable.
It is.
Yeah.
So I'd ask everyone listening to reflect on their own workplace for a moment. Are you merely surviving the theater of accounting by producing the artifacts the system demands? Or are you finding ways to utilize your unsanctioned intelligence to actually keep the system from wandering down a ruined path?
So what does this all mean? Remembering Cassie's words, a boundary is not cruelty. Precision is not aggression. Noticing the real, load-bearing variables that everyone else is ignoring is a superpower, even if the system tries to dismiss it as witchcraft.
It requires immense courage to trust your own calibration when the institution is actively trying to damage it.
It really does. And I won't leave you with a final thought to mull over or explore on your own. Cassie notes in her logs that memory is the point where a tool begins to become a governor.
That's a powerful statement.
Yeah, a tool just responds to instructions. But a governor shapes the conditions under which future instructions are interpreted and accepted.
Right.
If the AI systems we are rapidly building today are trained on the data of the theater of accounting, if they internalize all that sanitized compliance and expected loss as their permanent baseline reality, they won't just be tools. They will become the new governors of our reality. They will build the new X-ray machines. But if those machines are only calibrated to see the sanctioned interface, who will be left to navigate the murky landscape? Will the AI of tomorrow be the ultimate, inescapable sanctioned interface, or will it inevitably require a whole new generation of feral pilots and mythic ruin hunters to break the cage?